Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Bambito Sakura Geisha, wash processed Panama from Archer's Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Archer's, based out of Sharjah, United Arab Emirates. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on numerous occasions. And for those of you that have been around the channel for a while, you might remember that they were actually the first ever coffee roaster that was suggested to us. We picked this coffee up from one of Airworks' special releases, and there is a little bit of a backstory behind this coffee, as Sky reached out to us as they were doing a cupping of a number of Archer's coffees, and they were going to let us know which coffee they wanted us to review. And they initially picked the Cheva Slot 69, which is the coffee that we requested from Airworks. However, Airworks got a very limited selection of that coffee, and as a result, we did not end up getting that one. But we had an opportunity to pick from one of the other Panamanian geishas that they did receive, which did include the Firestone coffee. And I opted for this one largely because we haven't reviewed too many Bambito geishas over the last couple of years, and we've reviewed a number of the Firestone geishas. So as a result, it'll definitely be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 44. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe, at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which does indicate a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee, if I do recall correctly, based off of looking at the information on Archer's website, they have a roast level for their coffees somewhere between a 1 and a 5, and I think this one fell on the level 2, so it's not the lightest that they do offer. That being said, this one still did turn out pretty light, as I feel like a lot of people are surprised at how light Archer's can be at times, as during a cupping of some of Archer's coffees, Airworks did mention that they are somewhere along the lines of what you'd expect from Say's coffees, and I can kind of see that based off of the more recent Say profile, though this one did feel a little lighter than some of the recent experiences we have had from Say. So for that reason, I can say that this one fell on the more moderately light side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 21, first impression, and I felt like 3 weeks was a good place to start this coffee. We opted for the V60, and it was already the best experience we've had from any Archer's coffee up to this point, as it did offer the classic Panamanian geisha cereal grain feel to it that was reminiscent of what I would describe as Fruit Loops, and not that Fruit Loops quality that you get from weirdly processed Colombian coffees, but actually a very clean representation of that, as it offered a very prominent citric quality to it with a lingering floral finish, lending itself towards an excellent first impression. I was truly impressed by this coffee. Now, we have so many Archer's reviews on this channel, including a recent review of a pretty heavily processed Colombian Diego Bermudez coffee that I did not enjoy whatsoever, and that was the last coffee that we had reviewed from them. So having something turn out this in line with my own preferences was a little bit stunning. So it'll definitely be interesting to see from this point going forward, as on day 24 we opted for the Chemex, and there's much more of a mixed impression this time around, as it did skew a little bit more on the lemongrass side of things with a very strong citric quality to it. It does open up exceptionally well on the cool down though, as it has more of that Panamanian geisha cereal grain-like quality with an excellent florality in a very intense sense. Day 27 to the UFO brewer, and there's more of a mixed impression this time around, as it's offering some similarities to previous Ethiopian coffees that we have had from Archer's in terms of the citric presentation. So lemongrass once again did seem to be something that we were experiencing from this coffee, but it's quite nice on the cool down with that prominent florality once again. Aroma of the coffee itself is very lavender-like, which still wasn't translating to the cup as much as I was expecting or hoping from this one. Day 31. Through the V60 with Archer's recipe at a 15:1 and 94 degrees Celsius, and the coffee is expectedly less intense. It is a lower extraction recipe, and we've been yet to replicate that Panamanian geisha cereal grain quality that we'd experienced on the first try. It opens up as it cools down, but not to the same extent where we got that very well-defined Fruit Loops-like sense to it, as it does have more of the illicit citric qualities in a sweeter sense, so it's kind of some mixed impressions. I think I was mostly chasing that first impression given just how positive that first impression was, and anything that fell short of that wasn't quite as good in my impression. Day 34 through the Chemex with Archer's recipe, and this might have been the best the coffee had been to this point, as it's back to offering that slight fruity pebbles like Panamanian geisha cereal grain quality to it, so a lot of that super sugary cereal grain component. Outside of that, it's still pretty citric forward with plenty of the illicit orange qualities, very clean and a strong intensity and sweetness to it. So on day 37, back through the V60 with our standard recipe, and the coffee is excellent again, and this might have been the best experience that we did have from it, as it's super clean and floral with an excellent fruit sweetness and plenty of the listed lavender and Earl Grey. It is kind of interesting and worth noting that that Earl Grey note made a lot of sense for me, as I've had a lot of, we'll say it, Earl Grey donuts, so those filled brioche donuts. I've had quite a few of them because I do like the way that they taste, and they also weirdly remind me of Fruity Pebbles. So for that reason, all of those qualities make a lot of sense that they did turn out to be pretty similar. I can definitely see a lot of that Earl Grey. Outside of that, the jasmine and classic white floral Panamanian geisha feel is also present today, with more of that cereal grain-like sense. Citrus is the second most abundant quality, also presented in a sweeter sense with some traces of peach and a lighter berry component to it, as it's offering a beautiful lingering floral finish as well. Really impressed with the way that this experience did turn out. Easily my favorite Archer's coffee that we had had. All right, so let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. I had just very recently finished recording the El Burro from H&S, and as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, it looks very, very similar to it. I wonder if there are any differences to it. All right, let's go through it though. 2 level 5s, cleanliness and florality. Let's go through them real quick. Cleanliness level 5, no question about it. This one was a super clean Panamanian geisha, everything that I was expecting and hoping for from this coffee, and there really isn't anything to take away from it. Extremely well defined in the qualities of this one, so very happy with that being there at the level 5. Florality, level 5, and I mentioned that they had that lavender note list on here. I can see that it's nowhere near as prominent as the other floral qualities in this one. Very white floral forward. Can definitely see a fair bit of the jasmine-like characteristics to it, but most specifically that kind of floral cereal grain feel, which was very abundant and very present within the finish of this one as well. So I'm very happy with the florality in this. If you're going to reach a level 5 for cleanliness and florality, I don't want to say the rest of the tasting wheel doesn't matter, but you're already off to a very good start. You're already going to be one of my favorite coffees of the year. Let's go ahead and move on to level 4 as we'll start with the finish. Level 4. I was much happier with the finish of this coffee, largely because it did have that beautiful floral finish that a lot of Panamanian geisha coffees can have. And if there's a time where I'm going to have an issue with the finish of a Panamanian coffee, it's because it doesn't have that lingering, long-lasting floral finish to it, where this one did. So as a result, super happy with the way that that turned out. Lovely in that sense. Sweetness, level 4. Definitely on the more intense side of things when it comes to Panamanian geishas, and I feel like the profile of it did a very good job, given that if a coffee like this is significantly lighter, then oftentimes it can come off a little bit more subtle and toned down, but this one right here, the intensity was about where I would expect and hope for it to be at that level 4 mark. Really appreciated the sweetness that this one did offer, and I mentioned that it had that slight cereal grain-like feel. I mentioned that quite a bit, and it was prominent, sweet, and intense enough to justify that level 4 mark. Very happy with that. Let's go ahead and move on to the citrus fruit level 4. And I don't quite recall whether or not they had any sort of citric note listed on here. There were times I mentioned lemongrass being one of the more prominent qualities. That's when we were kind of struggling to get this coffee at its very best. And I could also see a little bit of a sweeter orange quality, something along the lines of a tangerine or an orange here as well. But outside of that, it still had that cereal grain, that citric cereal grain quality that we do associate with the Fruity Pebbles, Fruit Loops like feel to it. So that also played a role in that, justifying it there at the level 4 mark. That's the only time I'm going to be very happy with the citric qualities being a little bit higher, outside of maybe it being a super well-defined orange or pineapple, lemon, something that's very clean in that sense. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the level 3s. We just have a couple of them. Acidity level 3, not necessarily the brightest coffee, though I do have to say that it was a little brighter than some of the other Panamanian geishas that we did have, and I think that's largely because there were times we were experiencing a fair bit of that lemongrass-like feel to it. So level 3, where we opted to put it, though it could be maybe a little bit on the higher side of that level 3. Berry fruit level 3. Interestingly, I think they have a white grape note listed on here. I could have that completely wrong. My memory could have that completely wrong, but I do believe that that was the case. And given that I was experiencing a little bit of a lighter berry quality to it, I can certainly see that. So level 3, where we opted to put it. Stone fruit level 3. I don't think that they had any sort of stone fruit descriptor for this coffee specifically, but I was able to get a little bit more of that fresh peach feel to it, which definitely did seem to help, and it was prominent enough to justify putting that there at the level 3 mark. Very happy with that being an addition to this one. And then the final thing worth discussing, body level 1. Definitely lighter bodied cup of coffee. Definitely what I was expecting from this one. Washed Panamanian coffee. Gesha at that as well. So level 1 where we opted to put it. Tea-like body in that sense. And as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I already said that this one is my favorite coffee that I've ever had from Archer's, but it is worth noting that we did go to Airworks Cupping where they had, I want to say, a number of different Panamanian Geshas, all of which were from Archer's. So you had things like Chivas, Firestone, Jansen, etc. And this coffee right here was actually my favorite one on the table. While I was going through them, even though I had familiarity with this coffee, it's still the one that stood out. And I misread the label, so I honestly thought it was a different Bambito coffee than the one that we were reviewing, but I found it interesting because I said this one tastes exactly like the one that I am working with. So I guess it's not surprising given that it was the same coffee, but it definitely stood out. And in hindsight, I'm kind of happy that we got this one instead of the Chivas coffee. Now, I really wanted to review that Chivas coffee. I'll be completely transparent about that, largely because one of the Chivas coffees we've reviewed in the past ended up being one of our favorite coffees of the entire year. I want to say it was last year was actually a Chivas coffee that finished #1. So I wanted to review more Chivas Geshas, and that felt like a perfect opportunity to do so. And I was a little disappointed when I didn't get that coffee specifically, but having this one be a substitute and ending up enjoying this coffee more than the Chivas, because I did cup that Chivas coffee and I didn't enjoy it anywhere near as much as I enjoyed this one. And the other one that we were considering, the Firestone, I enjoyed this one significantly more than the Firestone. So I guess it all worked out pretty well in the end. This one is a contender for being one of our favorite coffees of the entire year, as we've had a very good year when it comes to Panamanian Geshas. And this one may not necessarily be quite as good as the one that I'm thinking of as being my favorite this entire year, but I feel like it's a very strong contender to compete with maybe the second, third, fourth favorite Panamanian Gesha that we've had this year. So that's massive credit to Archer's, massive credit to the producer. I think that everybody involved in this coffee did a phenomenal job. I found this one to be extremely enjoyable throughout the entirety of the time we were working with it. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. This one's definitely a classic Panamanian Gesha, as it offered plenty of those wild floral qualities that give it such a unique presentation, and the main reason that I love Panamanian coffees in general. In addition to that, super clean and definitely a fair bit more intensity while still offering other characteristics, including those fruit components. So a little bit of citrus, a little bit of stone fruit, and even a little bit of a berry quality, giving this one some excellent depth. It just has a lot of the characteristics that you would expect for a Panamanian Gesha, especially in terms of depth. As this one, there's so much to uncover from it and so much to enjoy. But I feel like that's the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Bambito Sakura Gesha, wash processed Panama from Archer's Coffee. Thank you for watching.